The reality is that if you're a big engineering company, you're going to have some relationship with an academy. So you have this influence to be able to say, these are the skills that we need. And so the academy needs to respond. But again, like I said, having worked in different levels of higher education, the model is very slow and very hierarchical. Those systems are very rigid and they're almost designed to not change.
Hello and welcome to the Future of Universities podcast series. My name is Madeline Arkins, Project Officer at UIN and your host for today. On this week's episode, I am joined by Dr. Leyla Acaroglu, Chief Circular Designer for Circular Australia and the founder of Disruptive Design. We discuss redefining sustainability, design and education, and Leyla shares her journey from industrial design to sociology, discussing the global impact of design decisions and her unique, ethical and slow growth approach to entrepreneurship. Hope you enjoyed the discussion. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Leyla Acaroglu on this topic of redefining sustainability. Leyla, among many accolades that she has, is an industrial designer, social scientist, and entrepreneur. She is Chief Circular Designer for Circular Australia, as well as founder of the creative agency Disruptive Design and the developer of the Disruptive Design method, a vocal warm-up today. And she is the founder of the experimental knowledge lab, the Unschool of Disruptive Design, and its sister training platform, Swivel Skills. She has a PhD in pro-sustainability change-centric design from RMIT University, and she was also named UNEP Champion of the Earth in 2016. So many accolades, Leyla. Thank you so much for joining us today to speak.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
To start us off, Leyla, would you mind just telling us how you came to the field of design? I know I myself, prior to learning about the circular economy, was very ignorant as to how design fits into this new model of economy. So how did you come into this field?
Yeah, so when I was, my late teens and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, I thought that the idea of having a creative career was a really good one. And so I stumbled across this profession that designed things like physical products. At the time, I found things like remote controls and toothbrushes really annoying because they didn't quite ever work properly or they had too many buttons. And so a friend actually was like, that's an industrial designer, a product designer, you should do that. So I rolled and that's what I started. I think a lot of people perhaps start their career this way, just feeling their way into something that they're mildly interested in. In the process of studying product design, I learned that this role where people are given the task of solving problems for humans using materials, manufacturing and processes is actually extremely influential. And that I, as a designer, was going to have this really far-reaching impact on the planet because I'd be making decisions about materials and processes and products that would not only potentially hurt or help people in their life, but also across the entire supply chain. And I felt extremely overwhelmed by that fact that I was going to make decisions sitting in an office somewhere and they were going to have this like tentacle effect all over the world. And as many people probably do when they get overwhelmed by the impact of their choices, I quit design school to become a sociologist, actually, because I was like, I feel this might be a human problem. I think I need to understand humans better. So I went off to sociology school, social science, majoring in sustainability because I was like, I want to know how the world works and I want to know how I can make my career that is driven by creativity a better version of itself. Like, how can I do the best at helping make things work better? And it's been a very interesting journey. I spent about 10 years studying in the end and working and in the end graduated with a PhD, as you said, in industrial design. So I went full circle, did my undergraduate.
Okay.
Yeah, did 2 years of design, then undergraduate and honors in social science and sustainability, and then my PhD in industrial design. So it was a great learning experience, and I'm so grateful that I have this kind of hybrid skill set of like social issues, and then of course creative, practical skills as well, because the tools I learned as a designer are just incredible, right? You learn to love problems, to break things apart, to put them back together again. You love criticism because you're learning how to use it as a way of getting like constructive criticism.
Yeah, let's be clear.
Yeah, let's be clear. So those tools have been really beneficial to me as I've forged this path more around education and also tool development, but my creative practice is really about designing things that help other people make change. So you mentioned the school, the unschool. I also design a lot of games and different types of interactions that help people think differently about the role they can play in the world, and really drawing on my own experiences of wayfinding to a pathway of a career where I get to have a really incredible impact in the world. I get to meet amazing people, and I get to see a better future every day through the things I do.
I love the full circleness of it all. That's a great bow tie moment. So you mentioned the Unschool, which recently celebrated its 9th birthday, if I'm correct. Congratulations. I heard in a recent talk of yours that you described that like one of the Unschool's aim was to undo the damage caused by traditional education systems, which I love. And I want to hear more about that. Maybe could you tell how the Unschool came about and how their approach is a counter to traditional education systems?
Yeah, so in my own education process, I'm a very kind of chaotic learner. I like things fast and dynamic and experiential. And I actually really struggled in school. I struggled to learn in the traditional way. And then eventually, when I did go to sociology school, I discovered that I actually really did like learning. I just had to learn in a particular way. And so that really challenged me in my own learning journey. And when it came to thinking about how do you give people, professionals especially, the tools to understand their own agency, which is the ability for an individual to identify the power or influence they intrinsically have in the world, and then to be able to deploy tools to enact or expand that over time, that we would need some sort of deconstruction of the opposing force, which is our traditional education system is very much like, here's a formula, follow the formula, and we guarantee success. But we all know that's not the case. And having been someone who really created my own flow, I really started to see that there was a huge opportunity in giving people some of these tools. And those tools are things like understanding, recognizing cognitive biases, looking at the system, so starting with the whole versus the parts and using systems thinking, being able to understand things like gamification and game theory, which are the things that motivate us, that drive economic behavior, as well as the tools of sustainability like life cycle thinking, as well as environmental impact assessment. And so I created this formula of different tools that I had learned and explored and experimented over the years. And we created the Disruptive Design methodology, which is these 12 parts, and then Disruptive Design method over a few years of experimentation with community members. So I would run programs in New York City. I was running these lunchtime sessions where professionals would show up, and we would do all this kind of experimentation around how to give people agency and tools, overcome some of the challenges they have about wanting to participate more significantly in the world and have more purpose, and also tools to enable transformation in their work and their lives in a really practical way. We started that, over 10 years ago, and that kind of evolved over time. And the Unschool ran until COVID a lot of experiential knowledge programs. So we ran these fellowship programs. They popped up all over the world, in like Sao Paulo and Brazil, and Kuching in Malaysia, and Cape Town in South Africa, and San Francisco in America. And we would run these very immersive experiences, which we were fortunate to have over 500 people go through that program. And now we have a couple 20 something thousand, I don't even know how many anymore, people in the Unschool online who come to do individual classes. We have over 100 points of entry. You can get free resources, you can do really short courses, you can do the entire Disruptive Design methodology, you can actually track to be certified as an educator in our methods. And the idea is that it's the option there for people to learn how it works for them. I try to design it using all different types of educational format. And it's really, look, for me, it's been one of the most amazing things, because I've been fortunate enough to meet so many people from all over the world who are like proactively applying change making to their lives, and they're doing great shit, and it's incredibly inspiring. And so when I look at the news and see how messed up the world is, I have this kind of optimism counteractor that helps me remember of all the individuals out there doing amazing things that are helping to make the world work better. And it really is just a critical mass thing here, right? The more people we can get switched on, equipped, engaged, and participating in designing the future that is going to be better for all of us, the more likely it is we're going to get to that outcome. So the Unschool is really a place for people to do that. And I'm very inspired myself by the people who come and the experiences I've had through it.
Absolutely. Everyone needs that counteractive optimism occasionally. I think it's necessary in order to keep trucking on. And the resources and tools that you talked about, I'm familiar with your Anatomy of Action one, which it's great to see really user-friendly and widely accessible tools on this topic, because I think that's maybe one of the things that people often criticize is like, but there's no actionable XYZ. And really there is. It's just a matter of looking.
That was one of the big motivators for me. It was like when I was first learning about this stuff, first of all, I felt like a lot of it was doom and gloom. And that was really hard for me because I desperately wanted to participate, but I was getting very depressed by everything, which has a counterproductive kind of outcome. So I really adopted my own, what I called solutions pie, which is a bit naff, but essentially I was like, if there's a huge pie that's a big problem, I can just take this one slither and hopefully I can infect the sides around me and other people will take slithers and eventually we'll be able to eat the whole pie kind of thing, problem pie. For me, that's about taking complexity and making it accessible, but also making it relevant to people wherever they're at on their journey, not lecturing or dictating, but inviting people to consider a different conversation or a different approach. And so the tools are really part of that. Like the Anatomy of Action you mentioned was a collaboration with the United Nations, and they said, how do we make sustainable lifestyles like accessible to everybody, which is a no small feat.
No.
And so I actually drew on one of the things that had actually inspired me, which is the ecological footprint, which is a tool you can do, which helps understand based on really strong scientific data, how big a footprint you have based on your consumption choices. And so if that tells you how big an impact you have, then the idea that we take actions every day with our hands, that we make choices that have impacts and flow on in the economy, then there must be a way of understanding what actions, if individuals at scale, like a lot of individuals took those actions, would have a positive impact. In 2018, we did an analysis of the last 5 years of scientific papers that said if everybody changes their consumption habits in these ways, we would have this incredibly positive outcome. And so the Anatomy of Action is based on food, stuff, move, money, and fun. These are 5 everyday actions that you take with your hands. And so things like divesting from banks that have clearly banks will demonstrate if they're more ethical and sustainable than their competitors. So you can literally just ring a bank, check, and if not, you can move to another bank. And believe it or not, that has huge impact, especially if you run a business and you have a large amount of capital going through that bank. So these kinds of actions do actually have impacts. And so we as individuals can make choices as well as encouraging those around us to consider changing their behaviors as well. But I will caveat this by saying that I'm very aware that individual actions alone are not what's going to change the world. But this is the weird thing, okay? So I also work with some of the world's biggest companies. And when I'm talking to CEOs or managers within these companies, what do you think they're using as their reference point for what kind of products and service to create? Amalgamated data of the individual actions of consumers. So when people are making individual choices, that is put together in a big kind of bucket of actions that then is used to determine what actions companies take. So the fact that lots of people have been divesting and that sustainability, they're making conscious consumption choices, is driving the pendulum of business towards having to respond to that sincerely. So actions do have impacts. It's just we need it to be at scales. That's where our social influence is really important. And we encourage the friends and family and people around us to also consider making lifestyle choices that are going to have a better outcome.
Fabulous. I love the infectious pie bucket of actions.
An infectious pie sounds not very
Doesn't sound great, but I get what you were going for. Maybe this ties in terms of breaking down complexities. You've designed a lot of curricula in your time with Unschool, Swivel Skills, and LinkedIn Learning courses. And Green Skills Gap has something that's been increasingly, thankfully, a target of policy in recent years, which is great to see. You once described the circular method as designing with the future in mind right from the start. And I feel like that ties in absolutely to redesigning education. What role do you believe higher education either can play in maybe a more idealistic sense or like plays currently in advancing this transition forward?
So important. But the issue that I see with higher education is that it's a very old business model. And so it's very slow to change. So curriculum take years to transform in a traditional academic setting, which is very painful because the world moves very fast. So if you just look at AI, for example, 6 months ago, the conversation was completely different to today. And the same applies with sustainability, with ESG, with the circular economy, with any of these not going away movements that are happening. We have seen a lot of laggard, like slow movement in higher education, even things like MBAs, right? Where literally people go to learn the skills of managing a business, are still not teaching how and what, say, an ESG materiality assessment is, which is literally now in the law in the European Union for companies to do. So there's this real disconnect between what industry or what community, what government, what's needed, and what the academy is teaching. So I think it's really important that we demand the skills be implemented, both from the students facing side of things, the educator side of things, and also business, because the reality is that if you're a big engineering company, you're going to have some relationship with an academy. It's just natural. So you have this influence to be able to say, these are the skills that we need coming into our pipeline, our workforce. And so the academy needs to respond. But again, like I said, having worked in the academy, having worked in different levels of higher education, the model is very slow and very hierarchical. Those systems are very rigid and they're almost designed to not change. I'm fortunate I've worked with some really progressive universities in different ways, but it's always a hero within the organization who's driving that change. And that poor hero often gets completely burnt out, but the students benefit so much from that kind of forward positive thinking. Like I recently got a random LinkedIn message from a couple students who I taught at a US university. The professor had brought me in to teach the disruptive design method. And two of these students independently had reached out and gone, oh my gosh, everything I learned in that course I'm now using in this new job that I just got.
Lovely.
So much. And I'm like, I feel so sorry for the rest of you who aren't getting these skills. Not just to say the work that I'm doing is the only kind of work in that, but it is this kind of different way of approaching problems. It's a much more solutions excited mindset. It's very much knowing how to recognize biases, have those soft skills, also understand technical terms in sustainability and like the current kind of business landscape, which if you don't understand what someone's saying, you're less likely to be able to contribute, which means you're less likely to be able to be representing yourself. So there's a real disservice, I think, currently, and I would love to see more progressive choices by the academy. I definitely started the Unschool in a way to poke and prod and to demonstrate some of the other ways that we can use the amazing thing that is university, this idea that we can build on knowledge and that we can adapt and transform it over time. But at the same time, the curricula, the content, the learning styles, like so many people don't succeed in an academic environment because of the learning style. It is so sad to think of all the potential great creative minds that are locked out of learning because they don't do exams well, or because they find it really hard to sit in a 3-hour lecture. So we have to think about different ways of engaging minds with information. And I do think as well, education should be, more phenomenon-based learning, which is, of course, you need to learn a series of things, that's clear, but there are multiple ways to go about learning that, and facilitating that learning experience versus dictating it, I think would just offer infinite creative opportunities for both the academy and for individuals who want to learn from them.
And just a better ease of power dynamics also, which it feels like is the direction we want to be going in.
How often now is a 20-year-old student who's grown up with the internet more knowledgeable on a topic that a 70-year-old professor who's been doing it is? Not because the professor isn't incredibly knowledgeable, but because the way in which people gain information now is so efficient and effective, and also information is changing so quickly. I think a lot of younger people are very good at quickly synthesizing information that they have available to them, but that doesn't mean they have the life skills to be able to use the knowledge. So then it is important. Like I've hired a lot of recent graduates or interns, and they're really smart people, but they just don't know how to deal with clients, or they don't understand that a client's expectations are very different to a professor's expectations.
Absolutely.
And so that kind of, I guess, a little bit of tough love, because that's what the real world is necessary early on, so that you build that resilience to the very fast and real criticism that comes from an idea that doesn't fit with what a client wants, or just having to navigate the complexities of changing marketplaces and things like that. And these kinds of skills are also very hard unless you've got a university that is bringing in real world clients or real world collaborators to give you that launch pad or that play space for what the real world is going to ask of you. I think that's also really important.
I'm going to ask you to put on your entrepreneur hat, because I feel like I've been asking a lot of education-based stuff at the minute. You had said previously that you had hopes or wishes that maybe by the unschool's 10th birthday, it would become obsolete, and that systems thinking would just generally be more integrated into schools. And I feel like that kind of thinking, more like community advancement rather than like personal exponential growth, is something that is not really compatible with the linear economy as we have it. And entrepreneurship is peddled as a cure-all in all aspects of life, it seems now at the minute, in terms of if you don't succeed in higher education, entrepreneurship is the way forward. I wanted to know your opinion of climate stewardship and entrepreneurship and how they intersect. That was a long question.
No, I'm just thinking how to answer, because one thing I want to say is, like, in my own entrepreneurial journey, I really struggled with the very capitalistic model that is entrepreneurship. In the unschool's journey, I followed the traditional journey of going to get capital and raising. And of course, you're encouraged to believe that other people giving you money validates your idea. So you seek that out as a way of almost getting confirmation from the system that your idea is valuable. But every type of interaction that I had was just extremely exploitative. And as a woman, I also felt a bit grossed out by it too, because it was extremely gender biased. Only like under 3% of women get funding. And this is, we're talking like 10 years ago. So I definitely had this kind of reckoning where I was like, if I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I want to be a different type of entrepreneur. I don't want to be one that's based on growth that is like constant, like shoot for the moon, ROIs, exploitation, because that's not the kind of model that I'm trying to also model, for lack of a better term, in the type of business. So I decided to not take funding ever, which has obviously limited growth. That's a reality. So all of my business enterprises have been self-funded through professional activities. So we do work that we get paid for, and then we use that to do the other projects that we want to do, like the Unschool and Swivel Skills and lots of different projects that we've done over the years. So I guess this also meant we had a very long and slow growth, but still pretty successful growth, right? It's just, I don't measure success the same way that perhaps a more traditional entrepreneur would, because I'm interested in change as an outcome, not obviously. Yes, everyone needs to get paid. That does help, because
that's
I have to
important.
eat, and my team have to eat as well. But the goal would be that, like the 10-year obsolete thing, is that also the business model isn't needed anymore. Like obviously people pay to come to the Unschool. There's a lot of free stuff, but there's still stuff people pay. So, but I don't know the answer to that either. It's this what if you could build things that do cool stuff for a while, and then they evolve into other things. Again, this is all, like, for me, it became quite an experiment as an entrepreneur. What kind of models can I mess with, and how can I still have success, but also still stay true to the kind of ethics and things I believe in. I also will say, I have a lot of friends who are entrepreneurs, and I have horror stories that have traumatized me. They've taken money, and at the cost to, like, they've been pushed out of their companies, or their social initiatives are basically just completely eradicated. The product sold. It's just stuff where, like, it's enough to keep a socially motivated entrepreneur, like, awake at night, scared of the potential negative outcomes of their good ideas. So I guess I have been a bit protectionist as well as a result of hearing those horror stories. But there's lots of successes as well. There are really great investors now. There are, like, the landscape has changed in the last decade, and a lot of younger investors and also younger VC funds and so forth, like different generations are changing the way they invest. And so it is shifting, and there is longer horizons and so forth. It's exciting to see that. And maybe I'll change my mind and one day I'll take money. You've got to be flexible in
You
life.
have to be flexible. Exactly.
I don't know if I answered your question about climate. No, I didn't hang on the climate thing. I will just say, yes, climate tech is climate response, right? I don't think just technology is the solution. There's a lot of nature-based solutions, business transformation, and of course, societal interventions that need to happen. And there's some really cool shit out there. There's like some incredible solutions that are being experimented and explored. And I love that. I love that we have a really creative cohort of people. And I think the more the merrier. The more experimentation, the more science, the more. I think that realistically, climate change is absolutely not going to be solved by one solution or even 100 solutions. It's going to be solved by mimicking and modeling the way nature is successful, and that is through intense diversity and constant evolution. So I think that lots of ideas in different ways, fit for context, small scale, big scale. I think we need all of that, and high tech, low tech, all of these kinds of interventions. So the more, the merrier. I think the key caveat I would say to that is always use science, because we know enough to know when good intentions can lead to bad outcomes. And at the end of the day, most of the time, perhaps even the first 5 ideas or projects you do may not be successful. So don't get too caught up in having to be successful early on. If you're committed to the process, then often it's the accidental discoveries through the early mistakes that lead to the better outcomes in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you a question about promising things on the horizon, but I think that is a hopeful note to end on, rather than everyone always wants to hear about challenges. But I think that's actually all the time we have. I could sit here and keep chatting to you, Leyla, because that was very interesting. Thank you for joining us. Leyla, where can people find you if they want to follow up?
Yeah, the best way to reach out to me personally is through LinkedIn. You can also find all the resources, lots of free stuff on unschools.co, and my own personal website, leylaacaroglu.com. You can find lots of different talks I've done and content and things if you're interested in diving into the topic more.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Leyla, for your time. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the discussion. Follow UIN on LinkedIn, and if you're enjoying our podcasts, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review on your podcast platform of choice to help others find this content too.